In Activity 5, Hurry Up or Slow Down, students first investigate ways to speed up and slow down the melting of ice. Students then discuss variables that can affect melting and the efficiency of various insulators. You will need the following materials from the kit: Activity Sheet 5, Part A, Activity Sheet 5, Part B, reclosable bags, 10 centimeters by 15 centimeters, cardboard boxes with lids, 1 ounce plastic cups, hammer, pails, petri dishes, bag of sand, bag of potting soil, heavy-duty plastic spoons, roll of masking tape, plastic trays, and plain tumblers. You will also need to provide a clock, fabric scraps, foam packing material, crushed ice, 2 long-handled ladles, 1 to 2 lamps, newspaper, paper towels, scissors, and tap water. To prepare for Session 1, make a copy of Activity Sheet 5, Part A for each student. The day before the activity, prepare 16 1-ounce cups of ice. Each team will receive identical amounts of ice made from the volume of water you selected in Figure 4.1. Just before the activity begins, fill 3 pails with hot water and 3 pails with ice water. Set up a distribution station with the plastic bags, cardboard boxes, fabric scraps, foam packing material, newspaper, masking tape, a hammer, pails of ice water and hot water, ladles, sand, soil, scissors, petri dishes, spoons, and tumblers. Make sure to keep paper towels on hand to clean up spills. Finally, draw a class data chart next to the one left on the board from Activity 4 and label it Activity 5 Class Data Chart Session 1. To begin Session 1, refer students to the Changing States chart and ask, what is needed to make ice change state from a solid to a liquid? Students should reply that heat changes ice from solid to liquid. Then ask, what do you think you could do to make the ice in this cup melt faster? Students will probably suggest adding heat to the ice in some way. Next, show students the distribution station and identify each item. Ask students to consider how they could use these materials to make the ice melt more quickly. Students may suggest putting the ice in a warm place, holding it in their hands, stirring it in hot water, or crushing it into small pieces. Instruct each team of 2 to design an experiment to try to melt their cup of ice quickly. In this session, they can remove the piece of ice from their cups. Hand out a copy of Activity Sheet 5, Part A. Have students record their plans and predictions and review each team's plan. Make sure you do not comment as to whether or not any team's plan will work or not. Next, give each team an identical ice sample in a 1-ounce cup and instruct them to collect the materials they need from the distribution station. Have the students carry out their experiment, recording the time and their observations in the chart on the activity sheet every 2 or 3 minutes. Record in the class data chart the time at which each team's ice melted. After all teams' ice samples have melted, help students calculate how long it took their ice to melt completely. Ask students to compare the actual melting time of their ice with their predictions. Answers will vary depending on the data. Then, instruct teams to record their data in the class data chart for Session 1. Ask, how do the melting times on the 2 charts compare? Students should say that the ice should have melted faster in Activity 5. Remind students that a variable is a condition or factor that can change and affect the results of an experiment. Ask students, which variables affected the melting rate of ice? And what conditions did they change to increase its melting rate? Students may mention such variables as the temperature of the water or air around the ice, whether the ice was left whole or broken up, or how vigorously the ice was stirred in water. Let students know that in the next session they will try to slow down the rate of melting. To prepare for Session 2, make a copy of Activity Sheet 5, Part B for each student and prepare 16 1-ounce cups of ice again. Draw a 3rd class data chart next to the one for Session 1 and label it Activity 5 Class Data Chart Session 2. At the distribution station, make sure that the pails of ice water and hot water are replenished and that the other materials provided for Session 1 are in sufficient supply for this session. To begin Session 2, ask students, Does anyone know what insulation is and why houses have it in their walls? Students may know that insulation is material between the inside and outside of the walls that is used to keep the house warm in cold weather. Explain that insulation is used to keep heat from getting in or out, and ask if students can think of any other uses for insulation. Students may mention a thermos to keep drinks hot or a cooler to keep food cold. Explain to students that an insulator is a type of material used for insulation because air and heat cannot easily pass through it. Tell them that in this session they will design and make insulators that will slow down the melting of ice. Remind the class of the different materials at the distribution station and ask students how they could use the material to slow down the melting of ice. Students may suggest keeping the ice in a cold place or wrapping the ice in something. Next, give each student a copy of Activity Sheet 5, Part B. Have teams record their plan on the activity sheet and predict how long it will take their cup of ice to melt. Note that in this experiment, they may not remove the ice from the cup. Review each team's plan, but do not comment as to whether any team's planned experiment will work or not, so that students can find out for themselves. Have the teams carry out their experiments, recording the time and their observations in the chart on the activity sheet every 15 or 20 minutes. Record in the class data chart the time at which each team's ice melted. In the intervals between student observations, you may want to schedule other classwork. To prepare for Session 3, each student will need his or her copy of Activity Sheet 5, Part B. To begin Session 3, help each team calculate how long it took their cup of ice to melt and record it on the class data chart for Session 2. Ask students, how do the melting times on the two charts compare? Students should observe that the ice should have melted faster in Activity 4. Discuss with the class what methods were used to slow down the melting of their ice. Also, explore with students which variables affected the melting rate of ice and what conditions the students changed to decrease the melting rate. Students may mention variables such as the temperature of air or water around the ice, the thickness of the ice, or the type of insulation around the ice. Next, ask students which variables they found to be most successful at keeping the ice from melting. Then ask, what material or combination of materials do you think might provide the best insulation for ice? Students should mention that thick materials worked better than thin materials, and that materials that contained air pockets, such as foam and plastic bubble packing materials, made the best insulators. Finally, review with students that good insulators are materials that do not let air and heat pass through readily. Point out that they used materials in both the melting and the insulating experiments to control an important variable, the temperature around the ice. To melt ice faster, the students exposed the ice to heat, and to slow down the ice's melting, the teams protected the ice from coming into contact with heat. To conclude the activity, pour out the water and ice. When all the materials have dried, return them to the kit. For science background, reinforcement activities, curriculum connections, and information about the Delta Science Reader, please consult your DSM Teacher's Guide.